A while back, a friend of mine had sent me a screenshot of a Wikipedia page that described what it called Monsieur Z thought or Monsieur Z-ism, and naturally, I was interested, only to find that the extent of information on the page was basically, Monsieur Z-ism is the ideology of YouTuber Monsieur Z. Well, you don't say. I figured it'd be a fun exercise to put together an idea of what exactly Monsieur Z-ism, my ideology, really is, and there's a couple of different angles to tackle this from, like, are we asking merely what the sum of my personal beliefs and thoughts are altogether, or is Monsieur Z-ism a more niche aspect of my ideology that's more so unique to my specific school of thought? Hello audience, Mr. Z here with another video for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have videos like this every week, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Just as a little bonus, I wanted to add that a core aspect of my personal philosophy, especially insofar as academics, is a strong proclivity toward critical analysis. People often like to argue that, well, if you believe in this, and that, we can't trust you to be unbiased in your work. But above all my desires, at the very top, is a desire for the truth. Whether I like that truth or not, a worldview built on self-delusions is doomed to collapse. That's part of the reason I genuinely enjoy using Ground News, who's been kind enough to sponsor today's video. I'm not saying that just because it's a sponsorship, I mean every word I'm saying, and I'm going to be fully transparent with you here, and I'm sure Ground News themselves would appreciate that given their values. I really appreciate the service Ground News tools can offer, letting me see the media bias on who's reporting on certain stories, how different outlets try to slant events one way or the other, as well as letting me know if I have a bit of a habit of only reading articles from one point of view and providing me news coverage that might be in something of a blind spot. Now, the Vantage membership is what Ground News would like me to tell you guys about, and it has two key benefits for subscribers. That's providing a factuality score based on the reporting practices of sources and their use of subjective language, and the other major perk is being able to see who owns and funds each of these sources, giving you some extra insight into how they might skew the story one way or the other. If you follow the link below and go to ground.news/Mr. Z, you'll get 40% off your Vantage subscription and access to all the tools we've covered. I highly recommend giving Ground News a shot if you haven't already. Now, back to the video. Let's start with the more niche aspect of Mr. Z thought. What would somebody who practices or believes in Mr. Z-ism actually believe? So this would be an ideology that primarily pertains to America and the way it would be structured. You know, I guess I have more niche positions on, foreign countries, but that's my position as an outsider. Like, I believe things like the Anglosphere and Kanzuk Union would be to a benefit for those countries, but I'm not British. I'm not living there. I don't have the on-the-ground perspective. I'm American. I am familiar with the culture, the sociology, the politics within the United States most intimately. I've experienced them. I've traveled all over the United States, met people from all over the United States, from all types of political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and that has really shaped my position on, America as a whole. I'm also, I'd say, probably more than anything an academic of American history. I study history in general, but American history is my bread and butter. It's my forte. So one of the cornerstones of Mr. Z thought in relation to the United States is that the United States, the US, America, it is not one nation. It is not one people. It is made up of multiple different people groups who have arrived. There's the initial settler waves, of course, but then, subsequent waves of immigration, and we've also had something of an ethnogenesis, I'd want to say, in the United States, to where you've had different cultures and beliefs emerge. The way I would cluster these is not even ethnicities, but ethno-religious groups. You have populations who by and large share a similar background, but at the core of that, something that binds them closely together is a shared faith. And this is something you see with a lot of civilizations. Religious background or ideological background, less so the latter. That's more of a recent phenomenon, I would say. But religious background has been a glue that really binds people together and sort of drives what their morality is, what their how they interact with one another, how they interact with outsiders, how they organize their government. A lot of that derives itself from religious belief. I mean, a prime example I could give is, let's look at the Southern nation. The Southern nation in the United States is primarily of Brittonic extraction. We're talking people who are primarily English, Scottish, Scotch-Irish, Irish, of course, Welsh. But what really binds them together is this shared low church religious background. Of course, there's non-denominationals, Presbyterians, but the dominant religion in that area is the Baptist faith, the Southern Baptist faith. Compare that and the way the politics of the Southern nation are, the way they like to organize things, the type of policy they favor, and compare that with the North, what we'll call the Catholic American nation. Now, the ancestry of the Catholic Americans aren't as closely clustered together as, say, the South is, with most of that population coming from just a few from the British Isles. Catholic Americans are of Italian background, Irish background, Polish background, Hispanic background, and as distinct as these groups are, you'll notice in the US there's a significant amount of intermarriage between them. Most of these immigrant waves arrived during the same time, they shared the same class for a long time, and of course they share many of the same values and beliefs. And these days, if you go to New York, you'll encounter this very often where, you'll find people who are of Italian background, Irish background, and Hispanic background, but oftentimes you'll also encounter a lot of people who are the products of intermarriage between those groups. People who are Irish on one side, Italian on the other side, Italian on one side, Hispanic on the other side. And you'll find this basically throughout any area in the United States where there is a large mixed Catholic population, or I should say ethnically mixed but religiously Catholic population. You'll see a lot of this in the Great Lakes region, where you have a lot of people who are of, say, Irish and French background, or German and Irish background, Polish and Italian, Irish and Italian. It's just something you see very commonly in those regions. Further, much like the Southern nation has been shaped by a very rural and fairly suburban environment, the nature of the Catholic American nation in America has been primarily shaped by its proximity to large urban areas. And as a result of this, you see the effect this has on opinions on policy within each of these nations. The Southern nation, for instance, is highly supportive of small government policy, of military intervention. It is highly supportive of decentralization, whereas for the Catholic American nation, you have a stronger proclivity towards strong centralized government. Politically, it is, or rather I should say, on a spectrum of conservative and liberal, it is more mixed. You have a stronger orientation toward labor politics. You have a stronger orientation toward perhaps not military intervention, but trade intervention, or rather a global trade economy, because trade favors these regions quite well. That exception becomes less so if we move away from the mid-Atlantic region and move more inland toward the region of the Great Lakes, which, was historically a large hub of industry. This region would probably be a lot more protectionist, but still, this type of government intervention in the economy is generally frowned upon within the Southern nation, because this use of government power is seen as tyrannical. It is seen as an overstepping of boundaries. It might be said to be communistic. It might evoke thoughts of, hearkening far, far back to ideas of the Civil War, and how the North was very much in favor of industrialization and centralization, whereas the South was in favor of decentralization, small government, and agrarianism. And some people might say that those latter points are, long gone. Most people don't think about that type of history in their day-to-day, and it's true, most people wouldn't consciously think of those things, but those events have left scars on the psyche of many people, and many people in the South do still identify closely with a lot of the culture that has been sort of passed down as a result of what was experienced in the South in the aftermath of the Civil War. So that's the very foundational aspect of it, recognizing that America isn't just one people but multiple people, and it's not just these groups, there are several across the United States. The next step is, of course, recognizing that as a consequence of this, America isn't a nation-state, America isn't a country that belongs to a single people. It is essentially an empire. We identify as American as something of an imperial title, as different as a Gaul would have been to a Syrian, they still would have said, I am a Roman, because they belong to the Roman Empire. Much like somebody living in, say, Chicago would most likely belong to the Catholic American nation, somebody living in rural Georgia would probably belong to the Southern nation. But despite this major distinction between the two, they both say, I'm an American. Now, some people might feel that this is sufficient enough, that yes, we're all just Americans despite our differences. But then my issue with that is that it fails to take into account the different needs of all these different American people groups. That The policy that is necessary for the policy that is desired and necessary for the Catholic American nation is highly distinct from what is necessary and needed for the Southern nation. A failure to recognize these differences and to say, oh, we're all just Americans. What's good for this American is good for that American. Oh, the divide, it's not between the people groups in America, it's between the red team and the blue team. That's insufficient to solving the problems that America as a whole faces and the distinct problems, I should emphasize, that each of these different populations face. It's one thing to be an empire, but it's a whole different situation to be an empire and not realize that you're an empire, or to refuse to acknowledge that you are an empire. The largest ethnic group in the United States at present is officially it's the Germans. The German Americans are like 14% of the U.S. population. If you account for like Germans who are maybe mixed with other things, it might rise to like 15 or 20 max. And that's the official figure. My theory is that, and this is based on some minor calculations I did a while back. If we were to take Britannic Americans as a whole, again, much like the South, people of English background, Scottish background, Irish and Scotch-Irish and Welsh background, that number would probably rest at about 30% of the U.S. population. If we're going to be passing policy, are we going to just pass policy that's good for that 30%? What about, African Americans comprise like 12% of the population. Mexican Americans comprise, I think, around the same amount. That's not even talking about Hispanic Americans as a whole. I know they're a very diverse group, but heck, Hispanic Americans are about 20% of the population. Italian Americans are about 5% of the population. America's a very diverse place. Russia is essentially a land empire. It is made up of multiple different people, but again, their largest ethnic group is still about 80% of the population, and they have a great degree of autonomy for those populations to account for their needs. In the United States, we don't have any of that. Now, of course, this is going off official census data, and ethnicity alone isn't going to cut it for how to restructure the United States and how to account for all these differences. The point is, the United States has all these different people to account for. I think India is also a good country to look at in this instance, where India, it's the same situation. It's a very diverse, large land empire, but it recognizes the differences in its various people groups. It builds its states based off of, what the history and culture of all those different groups are. Even in India, the majority of the population, again, around 80%, is united by a single religion. The United States is more divided than China, than India, and than Russia insofar as ethnicity and religion is concerned. Religion is another key issue. 63% of America is Christian. The largest branch of Christianity, again, there's massive divides between the different branches, is Protestantism, which is about 34%. And the largest denomination of Protestantism, again, the different denominations are very different, is the Baptists, who are only about 11% of the population. America can't be run like a nation state. America can't be run like France, where it's like, most French people are Catholic, most French people are ethnically French, most French people live under X, Y, and Z circumstances that's easy to predict. America needs a system that accounts for all these different distinctions, but without driving divides. And this is the next tenet of Mr. Z thought, Mr. Z ideology. America cannot be balkanized. America cannot be broken up. The United States of America is in a prime position with its geography. It has the potential to be one of the most powerful and self-sufficient countries in the world. However, that is only if it stays united, if it stays together. I don't want to see the American empire collapse. I'm recognizing America for what it is. I will recognize that it is a multi-ethnic empire, and I will recognize that it is a large land empire. But it needs to stay together. Why should America stay together? Why can't all of these different groups just go off and be their own countries? To that I say, look at Europe. What happened after the fall of the Roman Empire? You had various different populations going to war with each other. You had foreign populations moving in and conquering the territory. You had utter chaos. Up until fairly recently, Europe has been in a state of constant war with itself. I don't want to see that in the United States, and I know that could happen with the United States. Let's imagine a hypothetical where America has balkanized and collapsed, and all the nations have sort of manifested into their own states. Well, who gets Maryland? Historically, culturally, Maryland has been a large part of the southern nation. It's historically been tied to the southern region. However, what was Maryland founded upon? So let's say, not today, but a century from now. A century after America has collapsed and the societies have restructured themselves, you're going to get irredentist desires. You're going to get the Catholic American nation saying, Maryland is rightfully ours. It is the source of Catholicism in America, and it has historic significance to us. We are going to go to war with the Southerners for that territory. The Southerners are going to say, our people have inhabited this land for centuries. It is rightfully ours. And what's that going to lead to? It's going to lead to decades and maybe even centuries of conflict over this territory. And again, this is just talking about two American nations. That's not even accounting for the various other populations that are going to break away or hypothetically could break away and become their own states in the future and fuel the flames of war on the continent. Now, some of you might be saying, Mr. Z, this idea of redrawing the United States to account for all these different populations, that's crazy. America could never do that. America would never do that. That sounds un-American. But we already have a system in place precisely for that. Tell me, is America a unitary state, or is it a federation? Do we not have borders for states within the United States? Do these states not have their own constitutions? Do they not have their own governors? Do they not have their own laws and police forces? America has in place, already, the solution to its problems. All that needs to be done is to redraw the state borders. And a redrawing of the state borders can account for not only the ethno-religious groups in the United States, it can account for the different economies and lifestyles of that population, because of course, the Catholic American nation isn't universal from one end to the other. As we brought up earlier, in the Mid-Atlantic region, free trade and global trade is beneficial to that economy. Whereas for the Midwest, that economy was built on industry, was built on protectionism. It needs to maintain that if it wants to have a prosperous economy. I recall hiking around Utah and I bumped into this Mormon fellow and we just had a long conversation, and it sort of culminated with me saying, I'm envious of what you guys have here. You've built, for your culture, a state tailored specifically to your needs. We don't really have such a thing in New York. I've spoken about this before, where New York is basically like 3, 4, 5 different states, all divided and pulling in different directions. They're all based in different cultures, they're all based in different economic styles, they're all based in different lifestyles, and they can't really function as a single unit cohesively. I see it all over New York, whether you're living upstate in Long Island, in the city, or even out by like the Great Lakes in Erie and Ontario. Every part of the state has different needs and desires, and they're frustrated with the rest of the state for doing this, that, and the other. Most commonly, outside of the city, everybody's frustrated with the city, because the city has the most influence in the state, and it tries to pull things in one direction or the other. But even still, the city feels like it's dragged down by the other parts of the state. It feels like it doesn't understand why those parts of the state want to move in the direction they do, because, of course, the life is different there. The people are different, and they all want different things. So I'd say the philosophy of Mr. Z thought is really that the United States needs to redraw its state borders to account for the different nations that have emerged within the United States, the different economies and lifestyles of those regions. I look at the borders of the United States and I think, Colorado is a box. There's multiple different populations living in Colorado, and to lump them up in one box, to govern that under a single set of laws, how arbitrary is that? How does that make any sense? California is a massive state, and I have no issue with the states of the United States being large if they are functional and cohesive, but California does not work. And in all fairness, Texas does not work. There's a lot of talk about, Texas should just be its own independent country, and okay, sure, but it would still be a very divided country. Just to recap, the tenets of Mr. Z thought are, the United States is not made up of one people, but multiple people. There are multiple nations in America, and America is an empire, but it refuses to recognize itself as an empire. America has in place a system that will account for the needs of those various peoples and can fix it if only it would redraw borders. That is virtually all that needs to be done. to solve so many issues at the domestic level. People discuss a lot of frustration with political polarization, but what would you expect? What would you expect when you have so many populations just arbitrarily lumped together with no rhyme or reason to why the state borders are the way they are? What's the point of having a state within the United States if it doesn't mean anything, if it is literally just lines on a map? India, which has had a long history of these different populations vying for power and, becoming their own principalities and states, warring with one another, they have accounted for that. They have created borders that largely represent these populations and give them a level of local autonomy within a larger federal union, within a larger empire. All the polarizing politics between the Democrats and Republicans, would these be massive federal level issues if the Democrats and Republicans, or the populations that comprise them, had their own states where they dominated and could do whatever they wanted and create whatever policy they wanted within their state? You probably wouldn't have the same situation. Because it's like, hey, why do I care what's going on in Nevada when I'm comfortable getting whatever I want here in New Hampshire? Like, New Hampshire's tailored for me. Oh, Nebraska is tailored for me. Georgia is tailored for me. Sure, we have some larger issues that we have to, tackle as a country, like, okay, how do we build infrastructure? How do we deal with our foreign relations? How do we do X, Y, and Z? And that's all well and good. That can be tackled together as a population. But when social issues that people face on the day-to-day are on the ballot, and you can't even find unity within states, within the individual states, there is a massive problem there. And Mr. Z thought, or Monsieur Z thought, if I had to give it another name, I would dare call it utahism, because Utah has sort of been a big factor in inspiring this idea of what we could have for all the other nations in America. One of the frustrating things too is, I talk about something like this and people are like, oh, that sounds like ethno-nationalism. It's like, that's not really the point. Even the situation with the whole Catholic American nation sort of defeats that argument, where, we're talking about multiple different ethnic groups that have coalesced or come together because of a shared religious background there. When I bring up ethnicity, it's because ethnicity is often tied to culture. If you grew up in a certain background, if you grew up in an Italian background, there's certain things that go hand in hand with that. And people take that to the extreme of, okay, this is just segregation you're talking about. It's not that. It's literally just making more Utahs. It's like me as a Catholic Italian American, I can move to Utah. No one's gonna stop me. No one's gonna give me a hard time for that. But it's like, I'm one guy in an otherwise Mormon state, Once again, with the Catholic American nation, it's fascinating. Once again, I'll reiterate, I'm an Italian American Catholic myself, but what's fascinating is just how much coalescing you see between the various different backgrounds into this almost singular identity. One good example is a buddy of mine, Michael. He's of Irish and Puerto Rican background, but the way he talks, the way he acts, even the way he looks, you would think that we're related. You'd think that we grew up exactly the same, and in a way, we did. We share a cultural bedrock that you're not going to find in people who grew up in Georgia, in people who grew up in California, and people who grew up in Utah. That's something that is very unique to this region of the United States. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, when people talk about American pride, even when people talk about American nationalism, it's a very vague term. It's, I believe in freedom, I believe in liberty, I believe in guns and hamburgers and cowboy hats. It's this very amorphous type of pride. It is a very amorphous identity. It doesn't have any real basis. The most basis you can give it, I've spoken about this before, is when it's tied to Southern nationalism. It's when it's tied to a Southern identity. In that sense, it's not really American nationalism. Then it's the nationalism of a particular nation within America. American nationalism as a whole, it doesn't work because there are multiple American nations. Because what I am patriotic about, what matters to me, what speaks to me, is extremely different than what somebody on the opposite side of the country is going to identify with. You ask a New Yorker, what is an American? And he's going to have an answer that's different from the answer you're going to get from California. You ask a Southerner what an American is, and the answer is going to be very different. What are American values? These things vary. What I can get behind as a New Yorker, what I can get behind as an Italian American is somebody speaking the way I speak. It's somebody talking about the experiences I experienced. Somebody who has walked the streets I have walked and knows where I am coming from. Of course, there's things we can all agree on. We should definitely have a job staying here in America. We should definitely strengthen our nation's, or our country's, rather, self-sufficiency. But, what's going to get me excited is it's not talking about, oh, well, we're moving all the business, all of the filmmaking out of California and moving it to Atlanta. It's like, okay, what's that mean for me as a New Yorker? It's like, what gets me excited is the idea of, oh, we're going to start building more Art Deco buildings in the city. It's, hey, we're going to be cleaning up and modernizing the subway system. We're going to be tackling urban crime and beautifying the city. It's, when we hear about the promises politicians make, this is something that Trump talked about briefly. This is a policy point that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. First off, he's talking about building 10 new cities. These are most likely going to be out west, where there's a lot of government land. It's an exciting concept, but okay, it's not going to really affect me too directly. But the idea of, we're going to clean up our cities, we're going to build new beautiful architecture, it's like, yeah, sign me up for that. That sounds really cool. But if you're somebody living in rural America, okay, I can get why this doesn't excite you. I can get why this just seems like, okay, how's that going to affect me on my day-to-day? I think another aspect of Mr. Z thought, which is sort of disconnected from the previous idea, and that is, I guess you could say, Mr. Z urbanism, or, my positions on the role that urbanism plays in society. I'm of the persuasion that wherever you have a large mass of people, you'll eventually have the development of a city. And I think cities, despite being criticized very often today, especially in conservative circles, you'll see this, cities are pinnacles of mankind's achievement. If you have any civilization, the testament to what they can produce and create will be found most prominently in their cities. That is where mankind is shaping the environment. That is where man is building up skyscrapers. That is where man has tamed nature. That is where man has tamed the environment and is making the world his own. Now, I think a consequence of this, and not even cities in general, but development as a whole, whenever you have a progression in development, you're also going to have a progression in social development, in liberalism, and most specifically in idealism. Because as one develops, one tends to remove the hardships of day-to-day life. You farm so that you don't have to go out and hunt and gather. That aspect of your life has been simplified, and generation after generation grows up not knowing the need to hunt and gather. They know only a reality where, we can have as much food as we want as long as we farm. So those old values get taken for granted, and this can extend to issues of security as well. Like, you build up palisades and walls around your city to protect you from wildlife, and you think, as future generations would begin to think, hey, why do we have these restrictive walls in the first place? This hurts my freedom. I don't like this. I want to go out into nature. I want to see what's out there. And then they get eaten by lions. I'm of the persuasion that liberalism derives from idealism. And, this can be taken to be a negative thing, but there's also positivity in idealism. Idealism allows us to dream. It allows us to imagine a world as we would want it to be. And that leads to innovation, that leads to creation, that leads to new ideas. However, it can also be taken to an extreme where it is dangerous, where we don't consider the risks, where we think everything will be okay because it always has been okay. Or rather, we take for granted that things are good now, and we say, no, things can always be made better. Forget what we have now, we have to strive for something even better than this. Inversely, conservatism is based in fear. It is based in a paranoia that things can and will go wrong, and because of that, we must conserve what we have. We must keep things as they are. There can be no exceptions. We can't compromise on this, we can't compromise on that, because danger, because things will go wrong, because we will be punished, we will be endangered by us compromising on the things that we have established previously, the traditions we have put in place to protect us for some reason or another, whether we know what they are or not. Now, of course, the logical conclusion of this, if we take all of this into account, is that our destiny, or presently the projection that we are following, and if one were to look at the course of history, is that so long as we are moving forward, so long as we are advancing technologically, mankind will progressively become more and more liberal. Now, some people might say, oh, well, then it's a good thing that there are cycles of rises and falls to keep things balanced. But those rises and falls don't regress us to point zero. There's mankind at his very beginning. And, let's just say, let's skip ahead to like the Bronze Age. Man reaches a high level of development, and then there's the Bronze Age collapse. But during the Bronze Age collapse, we don't regress to point zero. We maintain a little bit of our technological advancement, and we progress even further higher. Then you have the collapse of the Roman Empire. But when the Roman Empire collapses, it doesn't reach the same lows that the Bronze Age collapse did. We retain even more technological development. And this cycle continues. It's not a pendulum that goes back and forth, up and down. It is a staircase where there is a rise and a fall, but we don't hit zero. A rise and a fall, but we are higher than we were before. A rise and a fall, and we are still higher than we are before. So, to the point that if there was a societal or civilizational collapse today, it would be nowhere near as bad as it was during the fall of the Roman Empire. It would probably just be electricity going out. Now, of course, that would still be disastrous. If we lost access to our electronic technology, sure, a lot of people would get hurt and a lot of things would be destroyed as a consequence of that. But for people even a century or 2 centuries ago, losing electricity wouldn't have really affected anything. The ultimate conclusion of this is, regardless, at least under current circumstances, of how conservative a society you have, so long as you have development, inevitably that society is going to move toward idealism, it is going to move toward liberalism, and it will become a more liberal society. Now, some might look at this and think, well, that's not too bad, because no matter what happens, we're constantly moving forward as a civilization, however you might want to frame it. But my concern is that we'll eventually reach a point, of technological development and social idealism where we are not able to bounce back, where we'll reach a point where we essentially go over the hill. Something happens that's out of our control, that causes a civilizational collapse, and rather than being something that will just set us back a bit, it does regress us to point zero. But by that point, we have lost so much of the ability to survive and endure hardship that humanity risks facing extinction as a result of that. Now, given the precedent of previous civilizational collapses in human history, this likely wouldn't be the next civilizational collapse we face, probably not even the one after that, but eventually, somewhere down the line, this risk of extinction would face humanity if this continues to go the way it does. The solution then would be to solve for the side effect of idealism. As we've proposed here, idealism is a side effect, a consequence, and an unintended consequence, mind you, of technological progress. Social progress and technological progress go hand in hand. It's not always universal and consistent across every single metric, but social progress of some kind advances. There must be a way to balance that with the social conservatism, with the fear aspect, so that there is a balance of fear and idealism, so you can have development, technological advancement, and progress without going out of bounds, without going into dangerous territory that risks a civilizational collapse or a civilizational regression. Maybe a good way to categorize these two schools of Mr. Z thought is, one is Mr. Z political thought, and the other is Mr. Z sociological thought. Alright, so now that we got the niche Mr. Z schools of thought out of the way, what exactly does Mr. Z personally believe? What's Mr. Z's personal political beliefs? If I had to pick some ideologies that I probably derive the most from, I'd probably say, in American politics, the Federalists, the Whigs, The moderate Republicans of the 1800s, I'd say those are all big inspirations for me. The progressives of the late 1800s, early 1900s as well, I would say probably contribute to my political philosophy. And what that all sort of boils down to is a belief in a strong, centralized, activist government, a government that, takes an active role in building up national infrastructure, in creating public works and services, generally trying to provide for the benefit of the people. A lot of Americans, especially in conservative circles, are highly critical of taxation. I'm critical of people who are critical of taxation. People say taxation is theft, I shouldn't have to pay taxes. There's nothing wrong with taxation as a concept. The problem is whether or not your tax money is being put to good use. I mean, I don't think any of us would mind paying our taxes if we actually saw the benefit of those taxes, if we actually saw those taxes put toward domestic investments that we all benefited from. The problem in the US today is that a lot of our tax money gets sent abroad. It gets invested in our military, which is used primarily abroad, which is used to defend other countries and to promote democracy in countries that some Americans haven't heard of. Most infamously, there's that strange investment the government made in trying to promote gender theory in Afghanistan for a while, which how peculiar of an investment. If we as Americans had more direct say in where our tax investments would go, I feel like we would probably be a lot more pro-tax. I think we all do sort of want to reap the benefits of this collective unit we're in. Some people say, we don't need government, we don't need any of this, but it's like, the very purpose of a government is to do for the masses, for the collective people of that country, what the individual cannot do by himself. And they're like, some people might say, well, I can take care of myself, I can do everything I need, everything I could possibly need, I can do all by myself. It's like, well, okay, just about everything you use has had some other hands put it together. Whether you're looking at, this video from a smartphone or a computer, it took a massive level of investment in infrastructure and multiple people to get that device designed, created, shipped, packaged, and sold. Like it or not, we do live in a society, and a society is made out of people. And a functional society is made out of people that work closely together for each other's benefit. What that manifests into on the government level is a reciprocal government, a government of reciprocity, where what I put in eventually comes back to me and to everybody else tenfold. What I think also goes hand in hand with all my inspirations is sort of this concept of economic nationalism. Yeah, I'm not really much of a capitalist, and heck, I'm certainly not a communist, but I'd like to have a government which is responsible and sees that the economy on its own needs a steady hand to manage it, a responsible hand to manage it. It's purely wrong for the businesses of this country to say, we can turn a higher profit if we put our businesses and our jobs in foreign countries, and then that deprives Americans of jobs, that exports our industry. Some people will say, it gives us cheaper products. But at what cost? A fraction of America's ingenuity, of our country's productiveness, is being harvested by a foreign country now. We're depriving ourselves of a high degree of self-sufficiency. That's something that America has long been built off of and long prided itself on. As a massive, essential land empire, America has no real excuse to not develop a high degree of self-sufficiency. Then, Donald Trump had been talking about this for his second-term campaign. So many of our essential goods are produced in foreign countries. That is insane. If we were ever on bad terms with, worse terms with China and the EU and some of these other countries, Russia, again, is a good example of the whole oil situation. what would we do? What the hell would we do? I'd say the government definitely has a responsibility to take measures to keep American business on American soil. I mean, beyond that, businesses can be pretty unscrupulous sometimes. The concentration of power that we place in businesses in America, we complain all the time. We complain all the time about special interests and all these groups that are basically buying politicians and buying votes and getting bailed out by the government. And then simultaneously we'll say, we need to have a pure capitalist system. We have to have a system in which the free market reigns. It'll all balance itself out. But, we have a screwy economy right now where we have, like, the worst aspects of a social economy and a capitalist economy. Of course, hand in hand with federalist policy and moderate Republican policy from the late 1800s, I'm very skeptical of foreign intervention. The progressives were they leaned into that a little bit, but a good chunk of the progressive movement was still anti-intervention and anti-war for a good long while. It was really the Roosevelt faction that was, and that's both Roosevelts, FDR and Teddy Roosevelt, that were very, very determined to prepare us for war, very determined to see America play a much larger role in global affairs. And we became a superpower and all, but at what cost? We really weren't ready for that. America's might is as a regional power. It's not really in a position to play the role of global superpower. I mean, imagine if Britain was 50 times its size. Would it still be able to, manage all of India and, all its colonies in Africa and Australia and Canada? No, it has to manage all of that territory, all of that population back at home. That's our situation. We have 50 Britons right here that we have to take care of. We have 50 states. We have a big country here. We don't need to be abroad. Britain had the excuse of, we're a small, overpopulated island. We need resources. We need to grow our economy somehow. Well, let's, look around the world for whatever we can find. The US, we have just about everything we need right here within our own borders. I think America being a superpower is a mistake. America is a regional power. I think our focus should definitely be on the domestic front and within the sphere of the Americas. European affairs really don't affect us too directly, nor do Asian affairs or African affairs. That's a whole different world. That's the old world. They're interconnected. They're tied to each other. Their politics affect each other. We are removed by an ocean. Right now I'm looking at the website, Ideological Influences for Monsieur Zism. We have authoritarian conservatism, I guess, yeah. Hamiltonianism, alright, that's on board. Protectionism, that works. American nationalism, yeah, I guess so. Traditional conservatism. Putinism. I'm gonna look into that one. Wilsonianism. Okay, so because I've made a video, arguing that Woodrow Wilson is not as terrible a president as many people have made him out to be, that makes me a Wilsonian. Do you guys know what a Wilsonian is? Wilsonianism, as an ideology in contemporary times, is somebody very much focused on foreign intervention. A Wilsonian, as it's defined in contemporary times, is somebody who is focused on the concept of foreign intervention for the purpose of promoting democracy. I'm not a Wilsonian, and for the record, Woodrow Wilson was not a Wilsonian either. I think Wilsonianism as an ideology is probably one of the biggest abominations, misnomers in all of all of ideology history, I would say. Right, so according to this, Putinism refers to the method of governance of the ruling Russian regime under Russian leader Vladimir Putin and its ideology. This is like what they did for my thing, where it's like, yeah, Putinism is the ideology of Putin, Mr. Zism is the ideology of Mr. Z. The Putinist regime is deeply authoritarian, often considered to be a kleptocracy and a dictatorship, although it carries the label of democracy. Am I influenced by Putinism? I mean, I I don't think so. I'm not Russian. Oh, hold on here. They have Nixonism and Kissingerism as part of my ideology? How do they define that? Nixonism is the ideology of the 37th President of the United States, Richard Nixon. It favors big government statism and mass surveillance of political enemies. Okay, I'm taking issue with that because that does not sound... This sounds like the Wilson thing where... I'll start off with this. Nixon is not a big government guy. You know, Nixon is like a proto-neocon. This is, Man, someone's gotta... someone might need to rework this a little bit. There's like no description for what Kissingerism actually is. It's just like the history of the ideology. It's the history of like Henry Kissinger here. Infamous for his support of anti-communist dictatorships to stop the spread of communism. Interestingly, Henry Kissinger, unlike most modern-era military interventionists and neocons such as John McCain, Anthony Blinken, Samantha Power, etc., have remained on friendly terms with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I mean, if I'm influenced by Kissingerism, it's definitely not directly. Now, the only other thing on top of that, insofar as my political beliefs, is social conservatism factors into that. You know, I'm a pretty old-fashioned guy. Of course, I grew up in New York City, pretty blue city, pretty liberal city, but, I was surrounded by an Italian-American community, and mind you, I didn't really get this. My upbringing wasn't particularly political. My family was very apolitical, but I sort of got the conservative stuff a little bit through my friends and their families, and, they were all it was sort of like a... It was sort of like a proximity type of thing. Even then, it wasn't a big influence on me, because when I started off being interested in politics, I was a lot more of a libertarian. I was interested in the whole self-made, successful businessman type of political mentality. And then, of course, when Trump was running for president for the first time, I just sort of got swept up in that. It's like, oh, he's making all these big promises. This seems really cool. But over time, I look into politics some more, I look into history a lot more, and I sort of developed this more socially conservative mindset. I recognize the influences that have been there. I recognize, the Catholic upbringing definitely factors into my perspective on some of these things, but I also try to, look at these things as unbiasedly as I can. I try to look at things as pragmatically as I can. Is this a realistic approach to things? Is this a sensible approach to things? One of the things I don't like is I often see so many people they'll take an ideology and they'll make it everything about themselves. My social conservative views, they're just sort of a facet of who I am. I've got liberal buddies, and we'll talk politics, and we'll debate, and we'll get into arguments. But at the end of the day, we still enjoy each other's company, and we try to be civil with each other. And we also recognize how rare that type of thing is, too, because when we met, of course, you don't approach people and they're just like, oh, what is your political belief? What is your political orientation? It can be kind of stifling to like building a relationship with a person. But you get to meet somebody, you like them for who they are. You start talking politics. You're like, wait, you believe in that? And then the fun arguments can begin. I think another worthwhile thing to take into consideration, this goes back to the whole matter of there being different nations in America with their own visions and perspectives on things. The culture of urban conservatism, especially in the Mid-Atlantic region, it's not like what the majority style of conservatism is in the rest of America. That would generally be a more rural southern thing. I'm not a small government guy. I'm not a decentralization type of guy. New York City has a way of running things, and there are definitely problems. There are massive problems with how certain things are run around the city. But you can't run New York City the way you run like a small town in the South or out in the plains. It's just not pragmatic. the type of conservatism I have is it's more tailored toward an urban environment. It's more tailored toward the things I would have encountered growing up, the kind of things that are more practical for this type of place where I live. And sometimes that translates well. Like, with a lot of my conservative buddies, we have a lot of things that we overlap with, but we also have disagreements as well. Now, of course, some might bring up my proposed concept of utahism is itself a decentralized system, and it's true, it is a federalist model. It's based on the federal model that America has in place right now, and that's because I believe that is the most practical approach to solving the issues of polarization and division that are facing the country today. Now, of course, utahism isn't a model by which the federal government should be run. It doesn't say the federal government should be this, it shouldn't say this much government power should be used. It's simply a means of making more efficient state units within the United States. Now, you can have utahism within a more big government conservative model, or you can have utahism within a small government conservative model. It's functional within both styles of government, but you can apply utahism in just about any circumstance because its primary concern is merely the structure of the states. Its primary concern is making sure that the state units are as effective and as efficient as possible. That efficiency, of course, being measured by how well that state represents its population, how well that state represents the needs of its people, and how well it's able to deliver on those needs. Man, we really went off on a tangent there, didn't we? But I think we'll wrap up the video here. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to share your political thoughts or your political ideologies, where you stand, let me know. Wait, what did I say? Alright, we'll wrap up the video. Thank you all for watching. Mr. Z, out.